Alright, so we're going to work through the Chapter 13 practice test, and Chapter 13 kind of gets a bad rap from a lot of people. It's difficult the first time you do a lot of these trig identities, but I think as you get better at it, you start to enjoy it. At least I do. So, 5 things here. Sections 1 or 2 are kind of the same, talking about proving trig identities. 3 is on specific types of identities called sum and difference, and 4 is on double angle and half angle identities. And then finally we bring it all together in section 5 and we use those identities to solve equations. So here are the main identities. There's a whole sheet of them actually, but these are the ones we tend to use most often. Tangent is sine over cosine. Cotangent is the reciprocal of that. And then that shows a relation between sine and cosecant, cosine and secant, tangent and cotangent. And then these 3 at the bottom are probably the most commonly used and most important, the Pythagorean identities. And the most important one is sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. You can get the other ones by, for example, if you divided each of these by sine squared, you would see that one of the other ones shows up. So sine squared over sine squared is 1. Cosine squared over sine squared is cotan squared. And then 1 over sine squared is that right there. And you could get the second identity by dividing everything by cosine squared. So let's try to practice a couple of these, and these are kind of 4 basic strategies. Really, all identities are about is about just doing a lot of them, getting lots of practice. You start to see the pattern. So the 4 basic strategies, when you're proving identity, what you're trying to do is show that the left side is identical to the right side. That's what an identity is. 2 sides are identical. It's always easier to start with a more complicated side. It's easier to take something hard and make it simple, rather than the reverse. Okay, the other things we want, those identities I just showed you, the 3 at the bottom there, we want to make those appear whenever possible. So we'll look to make one of those appear, or some variation. Like if you look at this one right here, if you subtracted cosine squared from both sides, you would get that. Subtracted sine squared, you would get that. Rule 3, we use all the normal techniques we've used before, so factoring, using things like the conjugate and so on. If it's really complicated, we can't see where to go. If we get stuck on one side, we can start changing the other side and see if we can somehow make them meet somewhere in the middle, because that's enough to prove it. And then lastly, when you're in doubt, change everything to sines and cosines. So you can see right here on this chart right here, everything here can be changed into sines and cosines. That 1 over cotan, we know cotan is equal to that. So that's how you change cotan into sines and cosines. That's how to change tangent. There's cosecant and secant. So everything can be changed when in doubt to sines and cosines. So in the bottom left is our identities, and we'll use those right now. So it says tangent is 1 over 3, find cosine and cosine and sine, I'm sorry. Here's the mistake. A mistake would be to say because tan is sine over cosine, therefore, in this case, sine must be 1 and cosine must be 3, because that's 1/3. That's wrong. You don't want to do that. Here's why. Sine could be 1 and cosine could be 3, but how do we know it's that and not 3 over 9, or 30 over 90, or 10 over 30? Or there's 100 different combinations we could use. Basically, you don't want to assume that you know what those things are. So the way we're going to use this is we have tangent given to us, so we'll look at these 3 and see which identity gives us tangent. Okay, and it's this one right here. That's the identity with tangent. So let's just plug that in. Tan squared plus 1 equals sec squared. Well, what is tangent? Tangent is 1/3. So we're going to take 1/3 and square it. And that will give us sec squared. 1/3 squared is 1/9. And 1 as a fraction is 9 over 9. So that means 1 over 9 plus 9 over 9 is sec squared. And 1 over 9 plus 9 over 9 is 10 over 9. So that is secant squared. What are we trying to find, though? We're trying to find, if we go back, we're trying to find sine and cosine. So let's look at sec squared. Well, sec squared, there's another identity that says sec squared is equal to this right here. So if we know sec squared, that means we can reverse it, we can flip it over, and that's cos squared. Because that's exactly what this identity says. It says they're reciprocals of each other. Cos squared, if you want to find that, you flip over sec squared. If you want to find sec squared, you reverse cos squared. So we don't want cos squared, we want cosine. So we're going to square root this, and we would get square root of 9 is 3 over root 10. And we'll rationalize the denominator right here. So we get 3 root 10 over 10. That will be equal to cosine of theta. So there's our cosine. How do we get sine? Well, we have another identity right here. And the identity right there says sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1. We just found cosine squared. Okay, actually cosine squared was this right here before we square rooted it. Cosine squared plus sine squared is 1. We know that cosine squared before we rooted it was 9/10. So 9/10 plus that is equal to 1. Let's subtract 9/10 from both sides, and 1 minus 9/10 would be 1/10. So that means sine squared is equal to 1/10. We'll square root both sides, and that's the square root of 1 over the square root of 10. If we rationalize like we did before, we would get 1/10 is going to be equal to sine of theta. So sine is 1/10, cosine is 3 root 10 over 10. Let's double check that to be sure. And that's exactly right. There's only one problem that we forgot to mention. This part right here. Sine is less than 0, so we have to remind ourselves using this acronym that we talked about. All students take calculus. In which quadrant is sine less than 0? Okay, well, what this tells you is the quadrant. So this one means everything is positive. This one means sine is positive. So if sine is less than 0, that means we're in one of these two right here. How do we decide? We decide based on this. Tangent is positive, and out of quadrants 3 and 4, only in quadrant 3 is tangent positive. So in that quadrant, sine is negative, and so is cosine. So that means we just have to fix one thing. Cosine would be negative, and tangent would be sine would be negative too. That's why they have both of those showing up as negative. All right, let's do one more here. So move this over, give us some more space. So first, let's start by finding our quadrant first, because that will make things a little bit easier for us. So all students take calculus. We are in the quadrants where cotan is negative, but cosine is positive. So cosine is positive here, and it's positive here. Remember that cotan and tan are like related to each other. They're basically reciprocals. But if you flip something over, you don't. That's supposed to be equals. You don't make a sign change. So this, not only is cotan going to be negative there, but tan will be negative too, because whatever the sign is on cotan, positive or negative, that will be the same for tan. So in which quadrant 1 or 4 is cotan and tan negative? It has to be this one. So that means we're in the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, tangent is negative, so I'm going to put a negative there. And cosec is related to sine. Okay, sine in the fourth quadrant is negative, so that means cosec will be as well. So let me just clear this off. That will just help us kind of keep track of what our signs are supposed to be. Alright, so next thing we want to do is use those identities. So they're giving us cosine, so that means we could use this one here. So sine squared plus cosine is 1/4, so that's going to be 1/4 squared. And that's equal to, it's coming from this Pythagorean identity. So we're going to get sine squared plus 1/4 squared is 1/16. Let's subtract 1/16 from both sides. So we get sine squared equals 1 minus 1/16 is 15/16. And then we'll root that and put a plus or minus in front. We already know it's going to be minus because we, for sine we calculated that up here by using all students take calculus. So sine is equal to root 15 over 4, and it should be negative because we decided that we're in quadrant 4, and that's what Q4 means right there. So sine is negative 15 over 4, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for cosecant, which is the reverse of sine. Okay, so what we need to do is flip negative 15 over 4 over. That becomes negative 4 over 15, and then we will rationalize the denominator. So we'll end up with negative 4 root 15 over 15. That is equal to cosecant. Okay, that's half of what we need. The other thing we need is tangent. Okay, we could plug it into that identity that tan squared plus 1 is sec squared, or we could recognize this. We know what cosine is because they gave it to us. And we also know what sine is because we just found it. And there's another identity on our sheet that says tangent is equal to this. Tangent is sine over cosine. So let's just plug each of those things in. We just found sine. It's right here. So sine is going to be negative root 15 over 4 over cosine they gave us at the start. Way over here they told us it's 1/4. So dividing by that fraction, that's a 15, dividing by 1/4 is the same as multiplying by 4 over 1. Those will cancel. And we'll get negative root 15, and we said tangent is supposed to be negative anyway. So that agrees with what we got. So let's double check. We should have tangent equal to negative root 15, and there it is. And negative 4 root 15 over 15 would be cosecant. Alright, we'll pick up these next two in the next video, because these problems obviously tend to be a little bit longer, so we'll spread them out.